Welcome to our Axios virtual event on shoring up U.S. manufacturing. I'm Eugene Scott, senior politics reporter at Axios, and I'm coming to you today from Arlington, Virginia. Welcome to our audiences on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Axios.com. Join the conversation today on Twitter with @Axios and hashtag Axios Events. Over the next 30 minutes, I will be joined by Axios co-founder Mike Allen, and we'll explore the opportunities and challenges of improving U.S. manufacturing capabilities. Our first guest is the Congresswoman from Michigan's 11th Congressional District, Congresswoman Haley Stevens, joining us today from Washington, D.C. Welcome, Congresswoman.
Thank you so much. It's such a delight to be with you.
Likewise. I would love to hear some of what you are working on now. We know that you have recently become the new co-chair of the Bipartisan House Manufacturing Caucus. What does that entail exactly?
Well, there's a couple of intersections occurring right now in the Congress that are really quite exciting for our manufacturing agenda. Certainly, we're in appropriation season, budget season. We're seeing the debt fight wage on, but we also have a select committee on competitiveness with the Chinese Communist Party, which is awakening a broader discussion of industrial and manufacturing policy in the United States of America on the heels of the historic CHIPS and Science Act legislation that was passed last year. So continuing to work in a cross-functional, bipartisan way on our manufacturing caucus, listening to the voice of manufacturers, large and small, remains really important. Workforce considerations, as well as elevating manufacturing in the halls of our lawmaking.
So what's one of the biggest things you're learning right now from America's manufacturers that you feel like Congress hasn't paid as much attention to?
Well, we're certainly coming out of very disruptive times. 2020 brought on the supply chain consideration, conversation, how to secure our supply chains. But one of the things that I don't think folks are focusing on enough or hearing about enough are how complex our manufacturing supply chains are and what we need to do to grow manufacturing here in the United States of America. It's really easy to say, hey, let's make it in America. Let's bring manufacturing jobs back. But how we actually go about doing that through a mix of incentives, grants, technical assistance remains very important and easier said than done. And so looking at what we did last year with CHIPS and Science, $52 billion to invest in chip manufacturing here in the United States of America, that is an amazing start. That is 21st century industrial policy. But how do we take that and put that throughout our entire supply chain, not just for microchips, but for other critical sectors in emerging technologies and areas that are disrupting our manufacturing sector, and certainly not just for automotive, which I'm very proud to represent a robust automotive supply chain in Metro Detroit, in the suburbs of Detroit, but also for aerospace, our defense sector, making sure that we're able to produce and procure to meet the charges and the challenges and the opportunities of our current time.
What do you see right now as the biggest challenge to bringing manufacturing jobs back to the States from overseas?
Well, one of them is that we are really cut to the bone with workforce. And I'm so proud of initiatives like Manufacturing Day that was started by the Manufacturing Institute, a division of the National Association for Manufacturers. I participate in a program that I started as a member of Congress called Manufacturing Monday, where just about every Monday, I visit a manufacturer. I connect with a training center. I come from the state that boasts the largest number of FIRST robotics teams in the country. We have SME, that is through their PRIME program, training engineers. We've got a host of organizations that are really excited and investing in the next generation. But until we come up with a 21st century high-skilled immigration plan, and just fail to continue to, allow us to operate off of the 20th century, we're going to suffer. And so we've got to focus on the talent. You're hearing this in the industrial Midwest where I am. Our union members are working around the clock to Silicon Valley out west. And so if we can make a big dent on our workforce considerations, we're going to continue to grow in manufacturing. I'll just close with this, Eugene. Too many small and mid-sized manufacturers who I meet with regularly tell me that they have such a tight labor market that they don't know if they can survive here in the United States of America, that they might have to move elsewhere. Let's invest. Let's continue to do both. Invest in workforce training programs, supporting those who are, in that apprenticeship program, going through an associate's degree for welding, computer numerical controls, and let's also recruit and retain the international talent. We are in an international race. I could go on about other areas where we want to be able to compete technologically, certainly with the CCP on artificial intelligence, on quantum. That's going to be critical to the manufacturing sector, as well as what we need to do to secure our access to minerals, rare earth minerals, and materials that will allow our supply chain and our original equipment production to flourish as well.
You mentioned the role that immigration plays in all of this. What do you think needs to be done in the House right now to get a policy change that will allow manufacturers to get the employers that they need?
Well,
policy action, I say.
Yeah, policy action. I'm going to tell you what, we can't legislate from crisis to crisis. That's really how we got CHIPS and science done. And CHIPS was, look, it was the investment in microchips, and it was also the bolstering of the National Science Foundation, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, doing a whole host of other things for our manufacturing sector. But that legislation came about because the tide rolled out from a pandemic. We don't want to be squeezed to the bone. We don't want to be losing our manufacturing prowess or seeing these worker constraints become so profound that we've lost an element of our supply chain. We want to get in front of that. So how do we do it? Well, we do it in a bipartisan way. And there are coalitions in place in this current Congress with listening ears and folks who are ready to act. That gives me belief and hope. This Congress will conclude in the very, very first days of the year 2025, right? We're in the 118th session of the Congress. It will conclude in the early days of 2025, just in a new marker. So let's dribble the ball. Let's get something done. I'm remaining faith. And we want to hear from partners like folks who are in the room today that will encourage members of Congress to make those moves.
You sound encouraged. I would love to hear what it is exactly that you and Republicans working together on this issue are finding the most common ground on.
Well, I would certainly direct that question to members on the Homeland Security Committee and Judiciary Committee. I know that there are pieces of legislation that I'm endorsing, that I'm hoping will make it through committee. As a member of the Education and Workforce Committee, I'm focused on the skills gap consideration, as well as using my perch on the Science Committee to also push alongside our ranking member, Zoe Lofgren, who's been a champion for raising the visa caps for high-skilled workers to meet those talent considerations. I'd also just say, Eugene, there's a lot more we can continue to do to make sure that we have a secure supply chain, that we are working cohesively throughout the federal government and a multitude of agencies so that we're not overly reliant on foreign markets to make, produce, and sell globally.
The conversations you're having with Democratic leadership about the role that manufacturing plays in America and what needs to be done, can you give us some insight on those?
Yeah, absolutely. I see this as part of almost every conversation in the Congress in terms of growing our economy, in terms of creating jobs that will pay people a good wage and allow them to build for their family's future, as well as, frankly, where we need to take this sector. For instance, I represent Automation Alley. I represent the industrial heartland of the Midwest. And what we've seen with the automotive industry as a key example is, despite challenges that were brought on by COVID-19, again, to mention supply chain disruptions and shutdowns and things along those lines, these were the folks that responded to the industrial call to action that hit when COVID-19 arrived on our shores, as well as the continued innovation. And innovation is so key here. It's not just making goods, it is innovating our future. So what are we seeing in automotive? Electric vehicle technologies, autonomous vehicle technologies, hydrogen proliferating at a scale that is, one, going to create new economic channels for us, profit channels for us. And we want to see that across a diverse and wide and equitable spectrum of stakeholders and employees, not just for the employers. But lastly, we want to win that race. We've got opportunities to sell into global markets because it's our innovation, it's our production, but we got to move quickly in terms of testing and readying our own nation for the adoption of those technologies.
Well, Rep. Stevens, we will be watching those movements, and we really look forward to seeing what you all are able to accomplish in Congress to get these jobs back to Americans and the areas and skills that they feel most interested in working in.
Well, thank you so much for the great conversation, Eugene.
Thank you for joining us. And next, we have a View from the Top segment with Chris Freites.
Hey, thanks, Eugene. And thank you to our sponsor, Walmart, for making this conversation possible. And joining me now is Walmart's Executive Vice President of Sourcing, Andrea Albright. Andrea, welcome to Axios.
Chris, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yes, and I'm excited to talk to you. And I want to start by talking about plans that Walmart made 2 years ago when you announced an investment of $350 billion on items made, grown, or assembled right here in the U.S. And I wonder, what impact has that investment had so far?
Yeah, Chris, that's a great question. So first, the $350 billion commitment is actually on top of a commitment we made earlier. So this is an expansion of that original commitment. And it's really important for us to continue to invest here locally. It has a really strong impact on suppliers, and it has an even bigger impact on the communities in which they operate. And so we're really focused on making sure that we're creating that economic opportunity for suppliers to continue to reinvest. Great example of a recent story is with Igloo. We actually partnered with them directly to develop a line of coolers, really cool coolers with like the, beer opener on the side. They're built for the outdoor, they're built for camping, and they are manufactured in Katy, Texas. And they were able to expand their manufacturing and distribution facility in Katy, Texas as part of this commitment and this collaboration. So we're really focused on finding places where we have synergies, where we can continue to expand products and growth in those local economies.
Yeah, so you mentioned Igloo, and I wonder, how do you find and identify suppliers like Igloo who make, grow, or assemble their products here in the United States? And what does Walmart do specifically to ensure they're partnering with smaller businesses?
Yeah, we've really doubled down on this recently. So we've developed a supplier development team that's focused solely on finding suppliers, developing them, whether they're a micro, small, medium enterprise, or they're an export-ready supplier that we're just not working with yet. So we're spending a lot of time building their capabilities and making sure they have access to things from financing to onboarding to how do I actually just do business with Walmart. And so as part of that supplier development team, we have an event called Open Call that team manages, and we do an open call for all of suppliers or innovators or entrepreneurs across the U.S., all categories, and they have the opportunity to pitch their ideas or their companies to our merchants. And those merchants, we saw over 1,100 different businesses last year. Those merchants really get to hear the pitch, give feedback, and interact with those entrepreneurs so they're successful in the future. Last year, we had 330 pitches that were successful that resulted in an order in our stores or our marketplace or e-commerce. And so it's exciting to see that come to life. It's exciting to see those investments. One of the most recent open call stories was a company called Cedrines. They're a family-owned Hispanic bakery out of Florida, and they're now in 2,000 stores nationwide. So those are some of the smaller examples of, it's not just great small suppliers. There's also an access to diverse suppliers that maybe they're female-owned, maybe they're disabled, maybe they're veteran-owned, but access to opportunity that maybe they wouldn't have had otherwise.
Yeah, I mean, a decade of these open call events where you're bringing thousands of potential suppliers to pitch Walmart, hundreds of billions of dollars. I mean, that's a lot of effort. And I wonder, why has Walmart made sourcing from suppliers who make, assemble, or grow their goods right here in the U.S. such an important part of your business?
Yeah, great question. Anytime that Walmart invests with a purchase order, it not only impacts us, but it actually impacts our associates, our customers, there are communities in which we operate, and then obviously the supplier. So there's a ripple effect of that investment, initial investment with the supplier outward. So think of it like throwing a rock into a lake. We start with the supplier, we invest in money. They usually have to reinvest into their local community to build facilities or expand their transportation or hire additional workers to build the product on the line. Those investments go out into the local community, but through the sustainable job creation. That job creation leads to reinvestment back into stores and retail and the local economies. And then customers now have access to product faster than they might have had otherwise. And so you kind of see this connection all the way through. An investment here locally with a supplier has a massive impact. And that impact is really important to us at Walmart. We want to make sure that we're continuing to invest here locally. And, you know, an interesting fact, Chris, more than 2/3 of our product that we sell at Walmart is made, grown, or assembled right here in the US. That's a little bit of a fact that most people don't realize because they think of Walmart, this huge global company. And here we are, 2/3 of our product grown right here in the US.
I would not have guessed that. I would not have thought that 2/3 of everything in a Walmart store is made, grown, or assembled right here in the US. That's fascinating. And the virtuous circle that you talk about is really interesting as well when that investment happens. And I wonder, Walmart has talked about becoming a regenerative company and your journey toward that. I wonder, what does that mean? And what are you doing to achieve that goal? Help me understand, how does all of this fit together, Andrea?
Yeah, it's a great question. So in 2005, right after Hurricane Katrina, we made a commitment to be a more sustainable company. And on that journey, we've evolved to say, okay, in 2020, we announced we were going to be more of a regenerative company. So that's not to say that sustainability isn't important, it's critical. But what we're saying is that it's not just about being less bad or, you know, being sustainable. We want to actually be regenerative. So it's a fancy way of saying we want to make it better than we found it. So if you think about that in the context of like nature, we grow a lot of bananas. We manufacture a lot of shampoo. We sell a lot of sheets. All of those require inputs from nature. So we want to make sure that we can put into regeneration, into these local economies, into these farms, into nature to make sure that those products are always available for our customers in the future. So we're really focused on reducing emissions. And one of our primary objectives is to get to zero emissions in our supply chain by 2040. So we're spending a lot of time thinking about nature, about communities, about waste, and how do we have a regenerative impact in all of these areas.
Wow. Well, we have to leave it there. Andrea Albright is Walmart's Executive Vice President of Sourcing. Andrea, fascinating conversation. Thank you so much for joining Axios today.
Thanks, Chris. I really enjoyed the conversation.
And now over to Axios co-founder Mike Allen. Mike?
Thanks, Chris. I'm Mike Allen, co-founder of Axios. I'm at Axios HQ in Arlington, Virginia. We all learned the hard way the importance of supply chains, which fortunately are unlocking. For some insight on that, our batting cleanup guest, as we talk about U.S. manufacturing growth, is the president and CEO of the National Association of Manufacturers, Jay Timmons, who joins us from Washington, D.C. Jay, welcome to Axios.
Thanks so much, Mike. Good to be here.
Well, Jay was looking a little rugged there, but at the moment, manufacturers seem to have a pretty good story to tell.
Yeah, there's no question about that. Manufacturing, this really could be manufacturing's decade, Mike, if we put the right policies in place and we don't mess up some good policies that we already have in place. The good news, I think, for manufacturers is elected officials and politicians of both parties, they want to see manufacturing grow and strengthen here in this country. So, that's a good goal for all of us.
So a little behind the scenes for our guests behind the curtain. I've covered Jay going back to our misspent youths in the Commonwealth of Virginia when I was covering politics for the Richmond Times-Dispatch. And Jay, I can tell you that for a politician, nothing is easier back home than to say made in America. But when they get here, they don't always vote that way. Why?
Yeah, that's a really good point. I actually was just in Richmond with Governor Youngkin as we broke ground for the Lego facility in the Richmond area. And this was a first chance actually for Lego to be built in the United States. You're right that it's so easy to talk about being for manufacturing and the jobs that manufacturing creates, as well as the economic opportunity for communities. But oftentimes, frankly, politics gets in the way. There are cross currents, cross winds, if you will, when it comes to environmental policy and labor policy. But I think the good news, and one of the things that is bringing Republicans and Democrats together in support of manufacturing, is that manufacturers provide solutions to some of the biggest problems that face our nation and our world, like climate change. And so we're starting to see politicians of both parties come together around critical issues that positively impact manufacturing.
Okay, so Jay, you said sometimes we mess it up by omission or commission. What's at the top of your wish list of what needs to be done to create, as you said just a few seconds ago, a manufacturing decade?
Yeah, so permitting reform will really allow us to kind of speed up the process for allowing a project, once it is announced, to getting those shovels in the ground and the facilities built. Now, whether that's a manufacturing facility or a bridge or a road, or even power lines, all of those things that we need to keep our economy growing. We're not talking about cutting corners, Mike. As you know and others know, manufacturers are committed to carbon reduction and a cleaner environment, a healthier environment, clean water, clean air. But what we do need to do is we need to kind of break through the bureaucracy that tends to build up and just get these projects underway. So that's number one on our list. We also have an issue of a massive number of jobs that are open in the sector, about 800,000 on average every month for the last year, 800,000 jobs that are unfilled, which means we can't really fulfill our potential as manufacturers in America unless we are able to train and educate folks for those jobs of the future. One of the ways we can do that, not the only way, but one of the ways we can do that is through immigration reform. And so that is another priority for manufacturers, so that we can focus our immigration activities and enforcement and rules on really strengthening the American economy. There are many other ways that our Manufacturing Institute is trying to attract folks into the sector. Walmart in particular has been supporting a program called Heroes Make America, which trains our military members who are getting ready to depart the service on manufacturing skills and bringing them into our sector. So it's kind of an all hands on deck when it comes to attracting that next generation of the manufacturing workforce. So that's at the top of the list as well. And then, of course, protecting many of the things that we were able to achieve over the course of the last decade and a half, as well as making sure that we have the right tax policies and regulatory policies in place.
Jay, I knew we were going to get there. What's your top point about tax reform?
Well, Congresswoman Stevens has reintroduced the research and development tax credit. You know, we are the research powerhouse of the world. We want to make sure that we can continue to maintain that level of leadership globally. But in order to do that, we have to recognize that we need to incentivize research and development, and manufacturers account for most all of the key research and development in this country. At the same time, we need to protect the reforms that were made in 2017. Look, if you take politics out of the equation, Mike, which I know is hard to do when we're in Washington, D.C., but if you take politics out of the equation, you can really credit all four of the last administrations for the great work that they've done, actually all five. So if you think about President Clinton, President Bush, President Obama, and the groundwork that they laid for opening up markets around the seas through around the world through trade agreements and free trade agreements, that allows us to sell our products to some of the customers outside of the United States. 95% of the world's customers are outside of the United States. If you look at what President Trump was able to accomplish with competitive tax reform and regulatory certainty, that was really a way to supercharge manufacturing. And one of the reasons that we've seen 5 years of record investment and job creation and wage growth in the sector. And then, of course, President Biden's spectacular efforts and successful efforts to move the CHIPS and Science Act, as well as infrastructure investment, as well as the IRA. That is all leading toward strengthening manufacturing and that manufacturing decade that we just talked about.
Jay, the CHIPS and Science Act is super interesting, and Axios has been writing a lot about this because when we think of manufacturing, we often think of the heartland. But if you look at where chips plants are, and when you look at where battery plants are for autonomous vehicles, the battery belt, the chip belt, it stretches from upstate New York to Arizona. You were recently in Ohio with President Biden. How much is this chips battery revolution doing for American manufacturing?
Well, I think it's going to revolutionize manufacturing. And I was so happy that Congress came together in a bipartisan way to pass this critical bill, because it really isn't just about our economic security, Mike. It's also about our national security and our competition with countries like China and Russia. You mentioned I was with President Biden at the groundbreaking of the Intel plant in Ohio, my home state. I also was able to be with Senator Sinema recently to talk about the impediments that we're seeing to expanding chips production and manufacturing here in this country. One of those impediments really relates to permitting reform. To get back to that topic, mining permitting in this country can take up to 15, 20 years. We don't have that kind of time. We need to be able to extract critical minerals from the earth here in this country, instead of relying on hostile regimes like China or Russia for those inputs, because at any time those could be cut off. And we need to make sure that we can protect ourselves here in this country. Because if you think about it, chips literally go into everything. You mentioned EV, electric vehicles and batteries, but think about all of our appliances. You know, I could sit here right now with my iPhone and turn off the fans or turn off my HVAC or the lights at my home from 8 miles away. Think of all of the things that have chips in them that allow us to communicate and allow us to have a better life every single day. That could come to a crashing halt if we don't build chips or manufacture chips here in this country.
Jay, you were recently in Europe, spent a couple weeks there. Ukrainian President Zelensky spoke to your board, I think, last fall. We've talked about manufacturing over the years as the arsenal of democracy. How does defensive democracy fit into American manufacturing?
You know, it's a great question, and I think it's one that is so often overlooked. Look, manufacturing can be used for good, or it can be used for malevolent reasons, which we're seeing in Russia right now. We are so proud of the history of our sector. And as you mentioned, the arsenal of democracy that we became during World War II. We feel that we have a special obligation as manufacturers in America to support democracy, as well as the pillars that we say are the pillars, the 4 pillars of an exceptional America. That's free enterprise, competitiveness, individual liberty, and equal opportunity. Underpinning all of that is a strong and healthy democracy. America is, of course, the beacon for democracy around the world. My mission to Europe, which took me to 8 different countries to explain the importance of the commercial relationship between the EU and the United States, as well as the North American region with Canada and Mexico, how important that relationship is for protecting democracy, but not just protecting it, but also promoting it and making sure that things like the Russian invasion of Ukraine don't happen again. Ukraine is a perfect example of a flourishing democracy. Yeah, it had its issues, but look, it was a democracy. It is a democracy. And we need to make sure that Ukraine not only survives this attack by an autocratic regime, but also is able to win this war. That was the message that we delivered in Europe. And it was also a message to point out that we may have some differences. I spoke with the Director General of the World Trade Organization, Dr. Ngozi, and I talked about some of the hiccups that we have in our trading relationship. but that it was so important that we get through those barriers or through those hurdles, if you will, because we have so much more at stake than a few disagreements. And it is the future of the world and the future of democracy around the globe.
Jay, we always finish our newsletters at Axios and our Axios events with one fun thing. It recently was the 30th anniversary of Take Our Kids to Work Day. Jay, you're the father of 3. How did you celebrate?
So we had about 35 kids here at the National Association of Manufacturers. And I love what our team does. They put together a very robust program. So every half hour or so, the kids will go from one division to another. For instance, in the legal division, they might argue a case between a defendant and a litigator, and it's really fun to kind of see them learn about different parts of not only what we do here as advocates for a strong economy and a strong manufacturing sector, but also for them to be able to connect with what modern manufacturing is all about. One of the challenges, as I mentioned, that we have is kind of attracting that next generation of the manufacturing workforce. We have a program called Creators Wanted that is all over the country, which is giving young people a hands-on escape room experience to show them some skill sets they can use in manufacturing. It was really fun to see kids from age 3 to age 13 running around learning things about manufacturing here in America. And if I could, I'd try to replicate that every single day, because it's a lot of energy, especially my son, a lot of energy.
Thank you, Jay, for making us smarter, faster. Thank all of you for joining this conversation. For more on manufacturing and business trends, or to get my newsletters, Axios AM, Axios PM, go to signup.axios.com. Signup.axios.com. Thanks for joining today, and I'll see you on axios.com.